All right, everybody. In the interest of everybody's time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So thank you again to everybody who is here for the first ROSC presentation series of 2023. Glad to see everybody. We took last month off due to the holidays, so we're glad to see everybody here today. Great turnout so far. For anybody who hasn't been to one of these before, how does this differ from our usual ROSC meeting? So the ROSC presentation series was kind of a way for us to look at topics related to substance use and mental health disorders, and kind of get a little bit more time to dig into some of these things, especially through the ROSC. So like one of the philosophies that we have, right, is that the substance use disorder and treating that is not only about the substance use and the mental health stuff, right? There is a continuum in a person's life that needs to be treated, and that consists of all kinds of things. That can consist of, you know, housing needs. That can consist of financial help, employment help, spirituality. There's a number of things that people in recovery deal with. And so we take the time in these presentations to say, okay, what are some other parts of someone's recovery life that we need to take a look at? And today we're really excited because we are going to have a presentation on domestic violence, which for me, I had to admit up until recently was kind of a blind spot. And I feel I was very privileged in that way. But it is a really, really important part of people's recovery, not only here at Serenity House, but just through ROSC and other outlets. So we're going to get into the presentation here very shortly. I just wanted to say, if you're interested, please put your name and contact info in the chat. That's the best way that we can stay connected. And we've had some really great connections made through these meetings. So if you'd like, you can put your name, organization, if that's applicable, and you can put your contact in there as well. If you were at the ROSC meeting last week, we did mention that kind of our ROSC referral team, which is the way we keep in touch as far as referrals and things like that go. It's currently in a text form, but we're going to be moving that to a WhatsApp. So keep an eye on the emails because I have been sending out information on how to sign up for that. And if that's something you're interested in, you can also dump that in the chat. Just say, hey, I'm interested in the WhatsApp, and we'll go ahead and get that information from you. So thank you for that. I just want to share a couple things, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. So the next ROSC Council meeting. So it's going to be on Wednesday, February 8th from 3 to 4 p.m. For anyone who is regular attendees at that, you know, it's the second Wednesday of every month, Zoom or in person at Serenity House. That Zoom meeting ID, by the way, is always the same. So if for some reason you feel like you miss an email or a flyer, you can always use that email because that stays the same. But Chelsea Lullaberte Barnes, who some of you may know is the founder of Live for Lolly, which is an amazing harm reduction organization, is doing a lot of advocacy work as it relates to some bills and laws in Illinois related to substance use disorder. And there's quite a few that are coming up here in the coming months. And I really would like to get everybody educated on what that type of work, what those laws are, and the type of work being done to advocate for them, so we can all kind of stay updated on those things. So please come out and visit that. I sent this one out in an email. In addition, we got the sock drive going. So a ton of y'all donated to the coat drive in December. So we were collecting winter coats for People's Resource Center in Wheaton. A lot of you who came to the holiday party in December dropped coats off. We ended up getting like 10 plus bags of winter coats and clothing that we were able to drop off to the People's Resource Center. The next one is going to be socks. And as it says there, the tagline, you know, clean, dry socks are really something we all take for granted. I mean, in a major way. And as those of us who maybe have had to live outdoors or unhoused, fresh socks are a very valuable commodity. So we're going to be collecting socks. A bunch of you have dropped socks off already, which is amazing. I've got like actually a plastic crate, but you can drop them off at Serenity House if you come to our next ROSC meeting, or if you want to send them in, or you can always contact me. I put that contact email and phone number on this flyer here. You can jot that down, and we can make arrangements. But thank you to everybody who donated so far. We're going to try and do some kind of drive every couple of months, and it'll change, and then the partner who we're doing the drive for will change. But again, this coming in, the sock drive will be going to People's Resource Center. So thank you for that. So I'm going to stop share. and kind of let you know what's going on for this presentation. So as I said, we're doing domestic violence today. We're going to be hearing from Zoey Hornstein, CADC. She's also the women's program counselor at Serenity House and a very valued member of our ROSC, and she's going to go through some stuff with us. And we're also going to talk to a little bit after that, Stephanie Adamson, who's the director of substance use services at Mutual Ground, which is an organization out here that's serving victims of domestic and sexual violence, amongst other things. So really hope to kind of have everybody get a primer here on some what this domestic violence stuff is, and a really great resource at the end. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to Zoey, and she's going to take it from here.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so today we're going to be just talking about some information related to domestic violence, some statistics, how it relates to substance use, how to recognize signs and forms of abuse. Again, my name is Zoey. I'm in the women's program here, and the reason I wanted to do this topic is because since being in this field, working with women, which I know it's not just women, but it's a common theme. Domestic violence tends to come up often, especially in those one-on-one sessions when you're meeting with clients pretty intimately. So I just thought that it was important to kind of show some light on this topic. So that's what we're going to do today. Let me share my screen. Okay, everyone can see that? Beautiful. Okay. Okay, so just to get things started, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this universal hand signal. It is kind of like the sign language for somebody who is experiencing a domestic violence situation. It could also just mean that they're in danger as well. But I wanted to kind of start with showing you guys this because I think it's pretty important. So basically what you do is you cross your thumb over and then fold your fingers over your thumb and over your palm. And when you are signaling that, you are telling somebody that you are in danger. I know it's pretty common for restaurants, like waiters, waitresses, to be trained to know what this is and what to look for. I know personally, my brother has worked at the Olive Garden for quite some time, and they were trained on how to do this and how to look for this sign, just in case there ever was a situation while they're at work. Just maybe a show of hands or a reaction or something in the chat if you have seen this, just because I'm curious to see if people have seen this and know what it is. Okay, I'm kind of getting a lot of mixed responses, some yeses, some nos, but I just wanted to kind of point that out, that if you ever were to see this, this is kind of your cue that like, hey, somebody is in danger. And also they're not likely to like hold it up in the air for everyone to see. It's probably more likely that they're going to put it in front of their chest or down low because they don't want whoever it is that they are in danger from to see that they are signaling that they're in danger. And I know usually the protocol with, just because again, my brother working in restaurants, if they see that, there are to like find a moment where they're able to get that person alone, bring them in back, get them out of there, call an Uber, call 911, whatever that looks like, whatever the victim is wanting to do in that moment to be safe. So that's just something to know and to look out for. Okay, so what is domestic violence? So domestic violence can be defined as a pattern of coercive, controlling behavior. It can include physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, and even financial abuse. So it is a persuasive, life-threatening crime, and it impacts thousands of individuals regardless of your age, your gender, sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, all of those things. It is something that can happen to anybody. So victims are often left feeling scared, confused, and then also dependent and insecure about their ability to survive on their own, whether it's financially or just otherwise. And then the children of an abused parent or somebody who's experiencing domestic violence will likely have these same fears and realities as well. Okay, so I'm a very visual learner, so I kind of have a lot of pictures going here, but this is just kind of like what abuse can look like, some visuals. So intimate partner violence can include preventing you from leaving. It can include throwing out your things, enforcing beliefs, pushing you past your limits, misgendering you, controlling pregnancy, unfair or hurtful criticism, and even controlling what you wear. So again, these are just some important things to kind of look out for, or even if you've experienced them yourself, like just to kind of gain an understanding. Okay, so just getting into like the types of abuse, we're gonna start with physical abuse. And what I did with all of them is I'm gonna define them, and then we're gonna go over like how to recognize signs. So first, physical abuse. Basically, this is the easiest form of abuse to recognize or understand. It can be defined as intentional bodily harm or injury. Aggressive physical contact should always be considered abusive, and it should be taken seriously always, even if it doesn't cause marks or permanent damage. It is still something to not take lightly. It is most frequently observed in a relationship of trust. So usually it can be between two parents and children, or even between like intimate partners, whether that's a relationship or a marriage. But it is a pretty common thing that can occur. So one of my pictures that I have in the corner here, it shows like this shadow scary thing coming out of the guy who is red. But I just want to point out that it is not always male and female. It could be anyone. So a lot of times the stereotype is that females are always the victim, men are always the perpetrator, but that is not necessarily always the case. So I do like this visual to see how, you know, you can be normal and then all of a sudden it just kind of comes out of nowhere. But I kind of wish that it was shown both sides, because it can be a male or a female issue. Okay, how to recognize physical abuse. So this could be as like an outsider looking in, or this could be somebody within the relationship trying to identify what it is that they're going through. But some things to look for is scratching, biting, grabbing or spitting, shoving and pushing, slapping, punching somebody, throwing objects to hurt you or intimidate you, destroying your possessions or treasured objects, hurting or threatening to hurt you, your children, or your animals. They could be disrupting your sleep patterns to make you feel overly exhausted. Burning. I know in the news there's been a lot of issues of people like pouring hot water on their significant other, and that is like a huge thing. You know, that is obviously a big form of physical abuse, and I feel like that's kind of been seen more and more. And then we have strangling, attacking or threatening to attack with a deadly weapon. And then any threats or actual attempt to kill you are, of course, signs of physical abuse. Okay, so next we have emotional and psychological abuse. So emotional or psychological abuse is basically any behavior, it could be verbal or nonverbal, that your partner does to control you and or damage your emotional well-being. So in this image, it says they only like you because I lied to them about you. And then you could see the body language of the person shrinking, getting smaller, and then the perpetrator is, you know, their body language gets really big. And it just sends a very negative message to that person, like, hey, they only like you, they're only your friends because I fill their ears with lies. And that's very emotional and psychologically abusive. So again, back to my PowerPoint, emotional abuse refers to the non-physical behaviors that are meant to control, isolate, or frighten you. When doing some research, some terms that kept coming up was aggressing, denying, and minimizing. So on this next slide, we'll kind of talk about them. So aggressing is to attack or behave aggressively towards other, or to initiate conflict with. So a perpetrator may use harsh language such as yelling, shouting, and swearing. And then denying is when one refuses to admit the truth or existence of a problem. A perpetrator may consciously refuse to perceive that a painful fact exists. You know, they're in denial. Minimizing is to reduce. to the smallest amount or degree possible. Basically, a perpetrator will do this to downplay what is going on. And again, that makes me think of like the perfect picture family when they're like, you know, everything's great, but actually behind the scenes, it's not. So that's the downplaying, the rude remarks, avoiding consequences for actions, and then claiming that he or she was just joking. Okay, so then how to recognize emotional or psychological abuse. So some things to look for would be name calling and mocking, especially when targeting things you're very sensitive about, intimidating you when he or she is upset, yelling in your face, or positioning his or her body in a menacing way. So that again goes back to body language. Making humiliating remarks or gestures, manipulating your children, telling you what you can and cannot do. Again, kind of also going back to telling you what you can and cannot wear, where you can and cannot go. Placing little value on what you say, interrupting, changing topics, not listening or responding, and even twisting your words. Putting you down in front of other people, like in public, that could be a pretty emotional, abusive thing to go through. Saying negative things about your friends or family, preventing you or making it very difficult for you to see your friends or relatives, you know, having that control, cheating or being overly jealous, shifting responsibility for abusive behaviors by blaming others or saying that you caused it, which is also known as gaslighting, and then monitoring your phone calls, your texts, your car, and computer use is a form of emotional and psychological abuse. Okay, so more visuals. So this person says, what did you do to make them feel that way? That is kind of like a form of gaslighting right there. And you can see that it leaves the other person pretty confused, asking, what did I do? That is a form of abuse. And then over here on the right-hand side, we have, it looks like a puppet. And it's kind of like the person is controlling the other spouse or the other person in the picture, which just kind of shows the power that they have. And then on the bottom left, body language, again, is very easy to spot here. The person gets larger and larger, and then the victim gets smaller and smaller, and they're backing away. And that's something that's important to look out for. And then finally, on the bottom right, it says, if you don't quit your job, I'm going to leave you. So that is very, very manipulative. You know, kind of having that control over like what it is you can and cannot do, where you work, and all of those things. Okay, next we have economic abuse. So money kind of equals control. So an abusive partner might take all measures to ensure that you're entirely financially dependent on him or her. And this is to prevent you from leaving or even feeling like you have any power or say in the relationship. So how to recognize economic abuse. So this could be forbidding the victim to work or attend school, sabotaging employment opportunities by using physical abuse to create a visible injury prior to an important meeting so that they can't go, jeopardizing employment by stalking or harassing the victim at the workplace, denying access to a vehicle or damaging a vehicle so that the victim cannot get to that job or school, whatever it may be, sabotaging educational opportunities, destroying class assignments, withholding money or giving an allowance, not allowing the victim to access bank accounts, hiding family assets, and then running up debt on a victim's name. Economic abuse, again, so kind of like the differences between the financial abuse and the economic abuse. So financial abuse is controlling money, stealing money, or coercing someone into debt. But then when you put those things together, it's economic abuse. So financial abuse plus controlling other resources such as housing, food, transportation, and employment opportunities. So those are just some two terms to look out for with economic abuse. Next, another form of abuse is stalking and harassment. So the term stalking means engaging in a course of conduct directed at a specific person. that would cause a reasonable person to fear his or her safety or the safety of others around them. It also can cause pretty severe emotional distress. Harassment is then aggressive pressure or intimidation. How to recognize stalking or harassment. So this could be making unwanted visits or sending you unwanted messages, voicemails, texts, emails, etc. Following you around. This could even go as far as including or installing like a GPS tracking device on your car or your cell phone, which is pretty severe. And when that's happening without your knowledge or your consent, that is stalking and harassment. Checking up on you constantly, embarrassing you in public, and then refusing to leave when you ask them to. Another visual, so like some stalker tactics, which is kind of a little bit repetitive from what I just said, but again, making unwanted phone calls and hangups, leaving unwanted messages, breaking into a victim's car or home, leaving strange or threatening items in front of their home, spying or watching the victim, approaching the victim at places where they are. So if you know that person goes to this grocery store and you're showing up there all the time, that is kind of like stalking and harassment. And then again, sending unwanted emails or social media messages as well. Okay, so next we have sexual abuse. So sexual abuse is any sexual encounter that happens without your consent. So we often talk about rape and other forms of sexual assault as something that only strangers commit. However, all forms of sexual assault do happen in relationships, and it is equally just as inappropriate. So being in a relationship for no matter how long or a period of time does not ever give you the right to sexually abuse your partner or demand sexual activity that you do not want to do. So sexual assault or abuse can happen in a relationship, and it is not just strangers. So I think that's something important to kind of look for. Okay, so sexual abuse can be unwanted touching, actual or attempted unwanted penetration by an object or a body part, forcing or manipulating you into doing unwanted, painful, or degrading acts during intercourse, taking advantage of you while you're under the influence or otherwise not likely to be able to give that consent, denying to wear protection, taking any kind of sexual pictures or film without your consent, and then threatening to break up with you if you refuse sex. So then I have this little picture here, because I think often when this, I don't know, my perspective is younger generations, when they're like at like a party or things like that, like college, I think of like, okay, you still need consent. And I think of the people who are partying and drinking and how often that could actually occur at a situation or a setting like that, which is why I kind of put this image, because the red Solo cup, it seems pretty dangerous. Okay, so how to recognize sexual abuse. So some physical signs could be if that person is eating more or less than usual, they're having trouble sleeping, they could even be soiling or wetting their clothes. And this could be bedwetting as well. It could be increased if this is something that is already happening to that person. They're likely to have pretty severe stomach aches, physical pain or itching in private areas, underwear stained with blood or other discharge, and then problems walking or sitting, emotional abuse. So they could develop severe anxiety, such as nightmares or clinging. Depression can occur, such as low self-esteem, talking about suicide, and frequent emotional outbursts or crying. They also could develop extreme anger, and this could kind of come out in the form of tantrums, aggression, or increased irritability towards others. And again, this is like looking at the victim of somebody who has been sexually abused. Okay, so this is a little chart that I have. I'm sure some of you have seen this before if you work in the field. It's a little hard to read from here, but I printed out a copy so I could kind of read it to you guys. But basically it's like a power and control wheel, and that includes physical and sexual violence. So basically they would be using intimidation, using emotional abuse, putting that person down, making them feel bad about themselves, isolation, controlling what your partner does, Again, the minimizing, denying, and blaming comes up, using children as a pawn. So that could be like making people feel guilty about their children. And then even like threatening to take the children away. Using male privilege. So this is something that I haven't talked about yet on here, but this is basically treating her like a servant, making all the big decisions, acting like the master of the castle, and being the one to define the male and female roles. And then again, going back around, using economic abuse, so preventing or keeping that person from getting a job. And I know it says, like on this chart, it says her, preventing her, but again, I want to point out that it can go both ways. It is not just females. And then I guess while I have this up, I also printed out, I wish I put it on here, but it's the cycle of violence again, but it's kind of a little different. I don't know if you guys can kind of see this, but basically it goes through like a cycle. So you got the honeymoon phase where apologies are made, gifts are given, you know, like I've learned my lesson, it's not going to happen again, spending time together. So again, that honeymoon phase, and then it'll slowly start to build, tension will build, jealousy, criticism, kind of like that eggshells feeling, testing the waters. And then that tension builds and builds, and then eventually you have like an explosion of violence. And then that kind of same cycle goes again and again and again. Okay, so why is it important for clinicians? So as a clinician, I feel like you're responsible for identifying cases of domestic violence when working with your clients. You should be able to assess the patient and the family's level of safety, providing ongoing medical care if needed, and then non-judgmental support at all times, and then providing that safe space to talk about domestic violence experiences and then the impacts that it has. Specifically in my setting, a lot of the conversations is like, how does it impact my ability to remain sober? How does it impact my ability to have relationships with people? And again, maintain my sobriety. So it all kind of ties together. Next slide. So some statistics to think about. So these are from last year, but since March 2019 to 2022, domestic violence cases have increased from about 21%. And then repeat offenses have increased from 29.7% to 31.1% from 2019 to 2022. So that kind of just shows that it's kind of getting worse. So some more statistics, approximately 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have experienced severe physical violence by an intimate partner throughout their lifetime. Also 1 in 10 women and 1 in 43 men have experienced stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. 1 in 6 women and 1 in 14 men have experienced contact of sexual violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And then 1 in 2 women and 1 in 2 men have experienced psychological aggression or abuse from an intimate partner. And then finally, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 2 men have experienced coercive control by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Okay, so intimate partner relationships in homicides. So nearly half of all female homicide victims are unfortunately killed by a former or current intimate partner. So the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence is when he or she is leaving that relationship. So that's when tensions are at their highest and it is the most dangerous for that victim. And then if the abuser has access to a weapon, such as a firearm, they are 5 times more likely to be killed, unfortunately. Pretty scary. This is just something I kind of threw in here because again, working with the clients that I've worked with, narcissistic abuse comes up a lot. So this narcissistic personality disorder is a mental health condition in which people have an unreasonably high sense of their own importance. So they need to seek too much attention and they want people to admire them. This disorder may lack the ability to understand and care about the feelings of others. And again, this kind of comes up a lot in domestic violence situations, specifically with the perpetrator. So kind of some steps to take, I feel like, with all forms of abuse is to first acknowledge the abuse, set those boundaries from your abuser, process your emotions around it, and then focus on yourself. This is a lot easier said than done, but it's just kind of like a breakdown of kind of how it should go. Okay, so domestic violence in the pandemic. So with the previous statistics, you can kind of see how it's increased. And I think a lot of this is due to the pandemic. So since March 16th of 2020, the National Domestic Violence Hotline has been keeping track of data to see the impacts from the pandemic. And then quarantine, of course, has immediately, raised those red flags because people are stuck at home with that abusive partner, not being able to leave and go places and get away. So then that isolation and then also financial strains that came with the pandemic can trigger those stressors that can negatively impact somebody who's already in that abusive relationship. People are less likely to report cases of domestic violence because they are unable to escape their abuser. So that's another thing to look at is like, hey, even though the statistics went up during the pandemic, so much of it was probably going unreported that we don't even have the numbers on. So that's just something that I think is pretty important to understand. Okay, so domestic violence and substance use disorders. So domestic violence can trigger substance abuse. Women who have been abused are 15 times more likely to abuse alcohol and then 9 times more likely to abuse substances or drugs than somebody who has not been abused. Being under the influence of any substance can really increase that chances of those abusive behaviors coming out. Okay, so 80% of domestic violence crimes are related to the use of drugs. That is a very, very big number. So I just wanted to really point that out and kind of let that sit for a moment. And then domestic violence and substance use disorders. So chemicals in the brain will seek out substances despite the consequences of their behaviors. So a person can know that, hey, I get pretty aggressive, I get pretty angry when I'm under the influence, but still, have that urge to use substances. So this can result in irrational, violent, or controlling behaviors within that relationship. It could result in loss of control, and then not able to control yourself physically, and then also not able to control emotions such as anger or other kinds of outbursts. When both parties have a substance use disorder, the chances of domestic violence only increases. And as a victim, being under the influence can impact their ability to understand how much danger they really are in, which is a pretty scary thing to think about. Okay, so addiction and domestic violence share a number of characteristics. So this again is that loss of control, continued behavior despite the negative consequences. Addiction and abuse tend to worsen over time. And then both conditions involve denial or shame. Impacts of domestic violence. So some mental impacts on the victims. So they can develop post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, including flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, and uncontrollable racing thoughts, depression, including prolonged sadness. Again, anxiety can develop, low self-esteem, and questioning your sense of self and your sense of self-worth. You could even have those suicidal thoughts or suicide attempts. And then I just threw in the suicide prevention hotline, just so that we have it on here. But it is a pretty common side effect of somebody who has been abused. And then again, alcohol and drug abuse will sometimes come in after that person has been abused. And then impacts of domestic violence on the emotional and spiritual health of a victim. So they can begin to feel that sense of hopelessness, feeling unworthy, apprehensive, and discouraged about their future, inability to trust, questioning and doubting spiritual faith. And then they could also become pretty unmotivated. So somebody who has been abused is likely to be what we call spiritually sick, because those things that bring them peace, those things that bring them whatever it is that they need are being depleted and kind of shut down. Okay, so then impacts of domestic violence on children. So we kind of touched on this a little bit in the beginning, and how it can impact a child if they're witnessing their parents do that domestic violence, whether it's the mom and the dad or brother, sister even. When they're seeing that, they're likely to have some other issues as they get older. So again, it says whether the child witnesses or experiences the abuse themselves, it can take a toll on their overall development. Children are at an increased risk of emotional and behavioral problems, regardless if they were directly abused or not. So this could just be from witnessing it. They can develop anxiety, depression. They can become very fearful of life around them, their loved ones even, and then they can also have some struggles in school. So that's why it's important to kind of look for these signs. I know, kind of like going back to the physical abuse portion of things, I know lots of professionals in schools are like trained to look for like, hey, so-and-so is coming to school with bruises on their arms or scratches on their face. And it's kind of a consistent thing that happens. Should we look into this? And that is why, you know, they're trained in those things, is because it does happen. Okay, so then moving on to some resources from DuPage County. So there are actually quite a bit. I was doing some further research for our ROSC map, and I was finding more and more things about domestic violence in DuPage County, which is amazing because I didn't know that all those things were around. But some of the main ones are Family Shelter Service, which is in Wheaton, Northeast DuPage Family and Youth Services, which is in Addison, Wings program, which they do not have an address, and they do that on purpose because they don't want you to know where they are unless you are really in need of those services, and that's to keep their victims safe. And then, of course, Mutual Ground in Aurora. Okay, so then I just threw on the phone number for the National Domestic Violence Hotline and the website here, just because I think that's an important resource for anyone who may be in need. And then I also put the National Teen Dating Abuse Helpline, because I feel like kind of going back to that one slide where like college, young teenagers in high school might be experiencing these things and they might not know where to seek help, and they might not even know that what they're experiencing is abuse. So I think that it's important to kind of spread awareness on that, and to have this phone number pretty readily available. And that is it.
So I want to say, Zoe, thank you so much for that presentation. That was amazing. And I feel very, very lucky to have you on board with us, not only at Serenity House, but at ROSC. And I'm going to open it up for comments here for just a few minutes before we hear from Stephanie Adamson. I just wanted to say, and Vincent, I think, pointed it out in the chat, that gaslighting is something that happens more and more. And it was kind of a phrase or a tactic that was always there, but we haven't heard about as much, right? It mostly, you know, in previous times it was, you know, physical abuse and obviously some emotional abuse, but gaslighting is one of those things that people do all the time and sometimes don't even know is happening to them. So I'm glad that was pointed out. And then I also wanted to say too, like I said, some of this stuff was a real blind spot to me. So I'm glad to be learning a lot of this stuff, but I really noticed when working with clients and people who have substance use disorders that a lot of this abuse is also tied in to some codependency issues, and people really get locked into these relationships and you know, take a codependent role, whether that's you know, the person that needs everything or whether that's the person that's kind of being more dominating in a relationship. So I really appreciate all those slides, and yeah, as somebody said in the chat, I'm going to make sure I send those slides out to everybody in a follow-up email. But I want to open it up here just for maybe 5 minutes or so for some comments before we hear from Stephanie. So whoever wants to, you can just unmute, or if you want to put up your little digital hand, you can do that too. So thank you again, Zoe, for the presentation. That was great.
Thank you, guys.
Going once, going twice. All right. If anybody has any questions or anything, like I said, we'll send the slides out and we'll make sure we follow up with that. So yeah, I do now want to turn it over for a few minutes to Stephanie Adamson, who's at Mutual Ground, and she handles a lot of the substance use program over there. Like I said at the beginning, it's an organization that serves some of these victims of this domestic and sexual violence and abuse. And they have great stuff they're doing out there, and you might not be aware of it. So Stephanie, I'm going to turn over to you for a few minutes to kind of talk about your services, and then maybe how some of the stuff we learned today ties into the services that you provide.
Great, no problem. Thank you. Thank you, Zoe. That was a great presentation. I really appreciated hearing all of that. So thank you. Yeah, so my name is Stephanie Adamson. I am the Director of Substance Use Services at Mutual Ground. So Mutual Ground, oh, thank you. I was gonna, so Mutual Ground has a variety of services. So Mutual Ground has been around over 40 years in Aurora, providing domestic and sexual violence services.
I was by Mutual Ground, but I definitely.
They have a variety of services when it comes to domestic and sexual violence. We have a 24-hour hotline. So clients can reach out, if somebody's needing support at all hours, anytime, they can call our hotline and receive counseling services over the phone, crisis services, resources, and things like that. So always know that our hotline is available 24/7. We also provide shelter. So we have an emergency shelter on site. Our location is disclosed. So it's pretty popular. People know in the Aurora area that we do have a shelter there. If the area is a risk, so if they are coming from the Aurora area and maybe their abuser might know where the shelter is, then we might help them locate to a more disclosed location. But usually we don't have too many problems with that. So it's a pretty safe and secure location. So we have emergency shelter. Clients call, they do a shelter screening, and then it's based on an individual length of time of how long they are allowed to stay in the shelter, depending on their goals and what they're working towards and all of that. So we have shelter. We also have counseling services. So if a client is needing that extra support or, counseling services for domestic or sexual violence, we provide counseling services. We do that in person. We also do that virtual, and they can be from any area. So to know that while we're in Aurora and we serve Kane and Kendall counties, we serve any area. If, you have clients that, live in DuPage County and, they can't get in elsewhere or whatever, and they're looking for services, they want counseling, and they want to do virtual things like that, we can provide that. The only thing that is based on area and service areas, we do orders of protection. However, that is for Kane and Kendall County. So either there has to be an incident that happens in Kane and Kendall County, or they need to work or live in Kane and Kendall County. Otherwise, if it's DuPage County, that would be Family Shelter Service, or the court in Wheaton. So that is based on location and where the instances had occurred. What else? So we do provide sexual violence services as well. So knowing that it doesn't have to just be domestic violence, we provide services for children as well who are victims of sexual abuse, who are also victims of domestic violence. So we have different family programs and things like that also. We do prevention. We do prevention in the schools. So we do domestic and sexual violence and substance use prevention in the schools in the Aurora area. So that's kind of a bit of a little overview. And then, so Mutual Ground acquired Breaking Free in 2019. So those of you that are familiar with Breaking Free, which is an outpatient substance use facility, we acquired that in 2019, and now I am the director there. And so we provide outpatient services. We take Medicaid insurance, and we have some self-pay options as well. And that's kind of an overview. One of the things I did want to mention is that we have our 60-hour training coming up. So if you're not familiar, in order to either work in domestic and sexual violence, or just, you know, if you really want to learn and know and understand, we do a training. It's called 60-hour. You can do a 40-hour domestic violence certification. You can do a 40-hour sexual violence, but since we're a dual agency, we do it in 60 hours for both. And that is coming up in February. So that's on our website. I can also put the link to that if you're interested in registering for that. It's a 5-week and program, and it's online this time, so you could do it virtually if anybody was interested. So that's kind of a little bit of an overview. I'll open it up if you guys have questions or comments.
I have a quick one, Stephanie. Have you found, like, maybe even anecdotally, that some of those figures that Zoe had mentioned, like maybe even in relation to COVID happening, has that shown in your services, maybe more people signing up for them? That's one. And then the second one, are you also kind of seeing that high number of people who are presenting for substance use services also have that domestic violence in their background?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we noticed during COVID is we jumped significantly in the number of services that people were calling. Our hotlines were busier. The requests for shelter, the requests for counseling services jumped pretty exponentially. So we did notice that, and it has been pretty high since. So we've really increased our numbers. I think also awareness has been, you know, it was all over the news and all over everything during COVID that domestic violence was higher. So I think that's also put some services out there for people. Also, virtual services has really helped people to be able to gain access where there wasn't that access before. So we did see an increase in the need for services during COVID. And what was the other question? Oh, for domestic and violence and substance use. Yes, so there is a huge correlation. We see a lot of clients with both. And so having the substance use services and domestic violence services and sexual violence services at our agency allows us to really serve the client and kind of all of the things and the trauma and stuff that they're facing and dealing with in one place. So while we will send clients to one building or another or do virtual services, I'm actually working on training all of our substance use counselors. Are all working on getting the 60-hour training so that they all know and understand all of these things and can help the clients as well. But we do work to make sure that everybody is connected in all of our services.
This was a question from the chat. Jim had asked, are there services available that can maybe help the abuser? So I think he brought up the point that sometimes some of those signs and symptoms, maybe even the abuser doesn't know necessarily that's what they're doing. And now obviously this isn't to take attention away from the victim, but do you know of any services that maybe these folks can be referred to?
There are, so we don't currently serve the perpetrators of domestic violence. It's actually something that I'm hoping to add at some point. So there are what we call PAPE services, which is a perpetrator intervention program. It's like a 16-week program. There's also one called MARS, and it's like men, and there's a female one. I don't know, I can never remember all the acronyms and everything, but we don't currently do those. For us, we refer in the Aurora area to family counseling services, and they do those perpetrator programs. But they are out there. I know DuPage County used to have one. I don't know if they still do. It's been a long time. And things like that. So they're out there, but it's not something that we currently provide.
Thanks for the question, Jim. Does anybody else, I'll open it up. Does anybody else have questions while we got Stephanie? Or just any comments in general about today's topic? All right. Well, I want to thank everybody. I just want to take just a couple more minutes here before we give everybody a few minutes back. Just in general, is anybody here from a program or organization that would like to promote anything? Are there any programs you want to let us know about? Are there any events coming up that you want to let us know about? I got about another minute here we can give you if anybody's got anything. Hey, Vince, go right ahead, man.
Appreciate that, actually. I'm at Quad County Urban League right now in Aurora. I don't know if anyone is very familiar or not, but we are a nonprofit and we focus primarily on economic empowerment. We have a career training program with ComEd and several other partner power agencies starting in February. If anyone knows of someone that could benefit from this, it's virtual Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 1. It's paid through a stipend. It's paid bi-weekly, so the participant will, by the end of the 11 weeks, will receive $2,000. And we do pay for their CDL permits. They will receive OSHA 10 training and CPR training as well. So, I mean, it really is a great benefit for someone to get their foot in the door. And if they are between 18 and 24 and they have barriers, we are also partnered with the WIOA WorkNet grants as well. So we could give them some extra assistance with that too.
That's great, Vince. I know you put your contact in the chat. Would you put the email in one more time? So if anybody has questions, they can reach out to you. And it looks like Mike's asking, what area is that program specific to?
I'm happy that you asked. So Quad County Urban League, we serve the Quad counties here in this area. So Kane, DuPage, Kendall, and Will. Also, if someone doesn't have transportation, we can help with that. We can give them an Uber. If they don't have a laptop to be virtual, then we can loan them a laptop as well. If they don't have professional attire, we can help them with that. Great services. It's just want more people to be aware of our programs.
That's great. Thanks, Vince. I appreciate that, man.
Thank you.
And we'll follow up with any more info. Anybody else have anything they'd like to mention? I got a hand up. Go right ahead, Christina.
Hi, I just wanted to say hello to everybody. This is the first opportunity I've had to join a ROSC meeting, so thank you for having me. I shared my info in the chat, so if anybody has questions or there's anything I can help with, please let me know. But yeah, I just want to introduce myself. Thanks for having me.
Great, we're glad to have you. When we saw your email, we're going to make sure you get added to our referral WhatsApp group when that launches. So, and again, I want to promote that for a second. It's been super helpful. In its current state, it's a group text, and there's quite a few members of that group text in this meeting right now. And there's been quite a few people we've been able to find services for that maybe on our own we were kind of stumped. And so that could be specialty services. That could be, I got a person that needs to get into detox today, has got this type of insurance. It's been really, really helpful. So if that's something you'd be interested in, again, we're kind of migrating it over to a WhatsApp thing because we're at the point where we've got so many people that the text version is a little unwieldy. So with WhatsApp, we're able to kind of create subgroups. So if it's not, say, just a detox thing, if it's, I've got someone with an employment issue, we can have its own subgroup there. So we're hopefully get that started. I think the target date is in February, and it may just be kind of a slow rollout. But again, if anyone's interested, you can reach out to us and we'll put you on that. That's all I got. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to mention before I give you 7 minutes back? All right. So I want to thank everybody for coming. Zoe, great presentation. Stephanie, awesome. Thank you for coming by and talking to us. There is going to be a YouTube version of this. We always put our meetings up on our YouTube page. So if you'd like to go back and watch it, or you had somebody who missed it, you can give them that link. And again, I will send out the slides to everybody in a follow-up email this week. So thank you again, and we'll see you at the next one. Everyone have a great day.